Very good week in terms of State of the Union addresses for Patriots Nation. And, also interesting news on the Joe Milton backup quarterback front.
Yeah, what did you make of that trade? Because from afar, it looked like they wanted to get rid of Joe Milton because they didn't get a whole heck of a lot in return.
I just don't think that the price was going to go up. It's what could they have waited for the draft and gotten more? Maybe, but to me, I don't think they could have gotten a lot more. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's GMs out there who were sitting on third-round picks that they were going to send. They did not get a lot. They moved up one round and added a seventh-round pick, a highish seventh-round pick too. But I tend to err on the notion of what do they expect to glean from a player who had one game against a team that wasn't really trying in the Buffalo Bills, and he absolutely made tremendous progress from the accuracy of Joe Milton we saw in the preseason. I think he would be a second or third round pick perhaps as a quarterback this year. But what would all these guys who are coming out this year be with a year in the NFL? So I find it fascinating, but I'm not surprised that it was modest. We do have a tendency around here, do we not, to overestimate?
A little bit, but I am kind of fascinated by this story, Tom. And if there's nothing more to it, there's nothing more to it. But it is the timing of it is interesting. The haul they got back. I mean, the rate of return is so slim and marginal. It's kind of like, why not keep them around if you weren't going to get that much in return? I mean, can you explain maybe what was really motivating them to get rid of them when they were going to get minimal in return?
That's a good question. Maybe Joe Milton said, look, I'm a little bit older than Drake May, a fair amount older than Drake May. I'm not going to be the starting quarterback here. I'm pretty good. I would like to go someplace else. I'm not saying I'm going to be a pain in the ass, but I'd like to go someplace else. What can we do about getting me someplace else? Maybe that was some of the motivation. I mean, he lands in a good spot, if you ask me. So, but I don't know that specifically. I have not been told that. But we will continue to try and report that out. But, there was certainly, if Joe Milton looks in the mirror and looks around the NFL, he has the right to say, I can play in this league. I can start in this league. Because he hasn't yet been proven wrong on that. So I don't blame him if he was, in fact, and again, I am not saying he was, but if he in fact did say, what can we do about getting me out of here? Then they accommodated.
I don't think it's just because the backup quarterback is always the most popular guy in town, Tom, or that, he does the cool backflips, or he's Bazooka Joe and can throw it 80 yards on the fly against his body. I just think that people around town are maybe not anxious, but, nonplussed about, seeing if Josh Dobbs comes in. I'm not saying that the goose is cooked this coming season because he's a competent backup, but there was just something sexier about Joe Milton's game that I think would have potentially kind of given the fans something to get excited about if Drake May were out. But, it'd be like you like to say, be that as it may, it's done, it's done. How'd you feel about how Vrabel took on a tone this week at the owners' meetings? I saw you sitting at the table when he walked in. He seemed like he was in midseason form already.
Yeah, I thought he was good on a lot of fronts. He and I talked briefly afterwards, and you just kind of exchanged notes, having known him for a while. And I said, look, I thought it was really good. I said you didn't give up the farm, but you gave us plenty of information and stuff to chew on. You talked about the prospects in some detail. You gave us feelings about your expectations. I thought it was a good session. He can, like he said, I think it was interesting to contrast his comments with Robert Kraft's comments. You have one person who is the forward-facing business person who has to sell the team as an entity to the region, to advertisers, to everyone else. And unchecked optimism is not a bad way to go if you're that guy. Meanwhile, you have the head coach who has to deliver on that unchecked optimism, saying, we had a good month in the third month of the year. Relax. Not per se to Robert, but I found that dynamic interesting because one of the things that Vrabel had mentioned prior to being hired, when he did a long article with a writer from The Athletic, one of the three things that he wanted to make sure of were clear expectations from the owner for what the rebuild would entail. And I do very much believe that this is still a rebuild, and I think people need to be realistic about not expecting playoffs and not feeling as if the playoffs not being reached would be a failure.
NBC Sports Boston's Tom Curran joining us here on WEEI Afternoons. Tom, we were down at Gillette today listening to the offensive coaches led by Josh McDaniels. And when he was rehired, the two things that I think a lot of people really talked about, or we talked about on this show, were how's he going to change the quote-unquote Josh McDaniels offense that we've all seen over the years for a modern quarterback, modern year, and are there too many cooks in the offensive kitchen? And he kind of addressed both of those issues today. Do you feel better after listening to Josh McDaniels about where this offensive staff and scheme is going?
I could not have felt any more positive about any individual to be hired than I was about McDaniels. Was not a, Nick Cayley or any other flavor of the month guy to be off. I can't even remember. Who was the other offensive coordinator everybody wanted?
The guy, Tommy Rees? Vrabel's guy from Cleveland?
Yeah. So to me, this was the best offensive coordinator that you could hire. So I would have a hard time feeling better about it today after listening to him. I just think he has redone the Patriots offense so many different times in so many different ways to take advantage of Jimmy Garoppolo or Mac Jones or Cam Newton's limited skill set, or the fact that the Patriots had no real wide receivers in 2018 outside of Julian Edelman that they could rely on. So they made it a running game, after 14 games in the regular season. They concentrated on being a power football team. So I have no doubt that he'll be able to tweak and meet people halfway as they need to be met, players or coaches. So I think that I remain bullish.
Hey, Tom, I want to revisit just this year's expectations for the team. If you go back at every owners meeting, it feels like Mr. Kraft is asked about what his expectations are, and I feel like in 2021, I think he said his expectations is to make the playoffs. Then it was after the success of 2021, it was to win a playoff game in the offseason of 2022, and then the last couple of years, it's basically, hey, have patience, we're rebuilding. But then this year he was asked about what his expectations were. And again, he goes back to what he said in 2021 offseason and says his expectations are for this team to be a playoff team. I mean, do you get the sense, even though you might feel differently about it, but I mean, do you get the sense that there's kind of this feeling there with the staff, just the folks, that this team should be vying for a playoff spot of the way it's currently constructed?
I don't get the feeling around the building that Robert Kraft's answer to the question of what would you consider a successful season when he said playoffs, I don't feel as if there's a shared expectation that is what is going to be the final result. Do I believe the Patriots believe they'll be more successful than last year, have a better foundation in place, which Kraft spoke about? There is a foundation in place now, and last year it was about building a foundation. The only thing that's really changed between this year and last in terms of building a foundation, so you can say it's there, Drake May's gotten better, Vrabel's been hired, McDaniels is back, and there's a few aging free agents who have been added. So I still don't think the foundation is there. I do think that Robert Kraft was selling as hard as he could on Tuesday. And I don't blame the guy for that. But remember, you're exactly right, Teddy. Last year, I used the quote because it stuck with me when he said, I think we might struggle. And then at the end, he goes, I just hope we don't struggle.
He did say that. You're right.
Yes, he did indeed. Hey, so Tommy, the way it looks like things are shaping up, and again, it's still 3 weeks from today, first round of the NFL draft. Not sure if you'd heard. But the way things are shaking out now, I think we're starting to trend in the direction of both Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter likely being off the board unless someone goes cray-cray and trades up for Shedeur Sanders. So have you heard, like I believe your colleague Phil Perry has, that Will Campbell has fans in the building? And are you steering in that direction, or are you still hoping for a trade down and your guy, the tight end, Tyler Warren from Penn State?
That's a good question. I mean, I think everybody in the top 12 is going to have fans in the building. Everybody is going to have, because they're good players. They're not elite prospects at this juncture, but you never know if they're going to turn into multiple-time All-Pros either, depending on the situation. So I think they all have fans in the building. Whether or not that player is the preference of an individual remains to be seen. As Vrabel said the other day when we said, well, what will you do it for? Tell me who goes at 1, 2, 3. And then it'll tell you. That, to me, is really interesting. Do they have in mind then who they would take it for? Because it's not hard to do the different permutations on what could go. It's like 4 or 5 different scenarios. So who would they take? I would imagine they probably have a feeling who it would be. Could it be that trade down? Wouldn't you think that if Will Campbell is their preferred flavor, that they would at least, as so many teams now obviously do, say, we're open for business. If anybody wants to say something, because Will Campbell could be had at 5, certainly, at 6, perhaps, at 7, 8, and certainly Armand Membo could be as well, and Tyler Warren could be as well. All 3 of those guys could be had. And I'm losing the Georgia defensive and
Jalen
Walker.
Walker, yep. He's a guy who might have appeal, too. The Patriots are going to get a good player. They're going to get a good player.
I do appreciate how you keep saying Tyler Warren in everything I've heard you do.
I'm with Tom on this 100%.
Twitter, NBC Sports Boston, Jones and Keith.
Yep.
Every place. You write it. Phil Perry, you got him doing it now. Like the whole thing.
I got him, yep.
I love it.
Well, he's an exciting player. Tom's right. I mean, he's a dynamic, exciting player. So I'm kind of with you on that Tyler Warren boat for sure.
All right, Tom.
Wait, I do want to remind you.
Yes.
That I said that Kyle Pitts would be a Hall of Famer.
Oh, well.
It's not over.
That's fair to point out. But
some work to do.
I'm turning up the heat in my house right now.
You better get going. It's only been, 4 years since you've been in the league?
I do believe he's on the trade block.
Tight end take.
Yeah, probably so.
Last time the guy was taken.
Hey, it happens.
We all miss, Tom.
We all hit. We move along. But I appreciate you joining